Sherlock Holmes is the world-famous detective, created by the writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, where he qualified as a doctor. He went on to write 4 novels and 56 short stories, featuring the great Victorian detective. The character of Sherlock Holmes has gone on to appear in numerous films, stage and television productions, as well as featuring in games and numerous publications. Conan Doyle created Sherlock Holmes while he was living in Southsea, in Hampshire, in 1886. We are going in search of the birthplaces of Sherlock Holmes and his creator Conan Doyle. We will also be visiting the Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes exhibition at the Portsmouth Museum. And on the way we will learn about Conan Doyle's life and his most famous creation, Sherlock Holmes. We begin our search in Edinburgh, in Scotland, the city where Arthur Conan Doyle was born. He was born on the 22nd of May 1859 at 11 Picardy Place, in Edinburgh, Scotland. Picardy Place disappeared long ago, and where it stood is now beneath a traffic island, which is framed by Leith Street and Leith Walk. Arthur was the second of 7 children. His mother, Mary, was an Irish Catholic. His father was an architect who suffered with mental illness. He was committed to an institution, which led to great hardship for the family. At the age of 8, Arthur was sent away to school, and he attended the Stonyhurst College in Lancashire until 1875. It was while at Stonyhurst that Conan Doyle developed his love of sports, writing, and storytelling. After Stonyhurst, Arthur studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh Medical School between 1876 and 1881. It was while studying in Edinburgh that he met Joseph Bell, a professor of surgery, who was one of his inspirations when creating the character of Sherlock Holmes. It was while studying medicine that Conan Doyle started writing and had his first story published, for which he was paid more than a month's salary. To earn money, to help his family, he spent time working as the ship surgeon on an Arctic whaling ship in 1880. But he disliked the treatment of animals that he saw during the voyage. After graduating, in 1881, Doyle took a post as a medical officer on a steamboat traveling down the west coast of Africa. After a brief, failed medical partnership with a former classmate in Plymouth, in Devon, he took a steamboat and came to Portsmouth. Southsea had developed into a popular seaside town. It was located next to Portsmouth, the home of the British Navy. In the Victorian era, Southsea had been transformed from farmland into a residential area by Thomas Croxton. Southsea took its name from the castle that Henry VIII had built on the coast in 1544, from where he watched his prized warship, the Mary Rose, sink into the Solent. Conan Doyle travelled to Southsea in June 1882 aboard an Irish steamer with only £10 in his pocket. He arrived at Clarence Pier, Southsea, with the intention of setting up a doctor's practice. Today, Clarence Pier, family amusement park, which includes rides, activities, and restaurants. Arthur bought a map and started walking the streets, looking for a suitable location by making notes of where the existing doctors' practices were located. Conan Doyle rented number 1 Bush Villas, Elm Grove, Southsea, which was a 3-story house with 8 rooms. The property was located between a church and a hotel. Today, a block of flats stands on the site where Arthur Conan Doyle first lived when he arrived in Southsea. During World War II, the original houses that had stood here were destroyed during a German bombing raid. Conan Doyle set up a consulting room here, but he only received a small number of patients. He had little money and could only afford to furnish one of the upstairs rooms. Due to his lack of clients, Doyle had plenty of time to write and sold some stories to magazines, which helped to pay his bills. Conan Doyle continued to build his practice. He mainly dealt with the poor in the community, and he saw much suffering. In 1885, Arthur met and married Louisa Hawkins, and the couple lived together here in Bush Villas. In April 1886, Conan Doyle started writing his first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, which he completed in 6 weeks. It then took 18 months for the story to be published, and it didn't create much public interest at the time. Doyle tried to attract patients by participating in local sports, including playing as goalkeeper for Portsmouth Football Club. In January 1889, Louisa gave birth to the couple's first child, a daughter, Mary, which Arthur delivered at Bush Villas. In 1887, while living in Southsea, Conan Doyle started his fascination with psychic phenomena, including seances and visits to mediums. Conan Doyle wrote the second Sherlock Holmes story in 1890, The Sign of Four, which took him 2 months to complete. Lippincott's magazine had hired Doyle to write it during a dinner with Oscar Wilde, who was also hired to write The Portrait of Dorian Gray. In 1890, Doyle went to Berlin to learn about treatments for TB. After this trip, he decided to give up his Southsea doctor's practice. In December 1890, Conan Doyle's Southsea adventure came to an end when he decided to go to Vienna to study ophthalmology. We are walking from Southsea along some of the coast that Conan Doyle would have been familiar with during his time living in Southsea. We are heading towards the Point in Old Portsmouth. In 1891, the Doyles moved to London. Arthur rented a consulting room, but again, he struggled to find patients. Whilst waiting for patients, Conan Doyle had plenty of time to write, and he had success with The White Company, an historical romance. Doyle felt that to be a successful magazine writer, he needed to focus on a single character, featuring in a series of self-contained stories. In 1891, Doyle submitted 2 Sherlock Holmes stories to the Strand magazine, A Scandal in Bohemia and The Red-Headed League. Sherlock Holmes first appeared in the Strand magazine in July 1891. The magazine immediately commissioned 4 more Holmes stories. In May 1891, Conan Doyle became seriously ill with influenza. Sadly, his sister, Annette, had died from the same illness in 1890. Louisa nursed Conan Doyle back to health. Arthur decided to give up medicine and become a full-time writer. At Old Portsmouth you will find historic smugglers' pubs and views of Portsmouth and the historic dockyard. We are now going to visit the Portsmouth Museum to see the Sherlock Holmes exhibition, A Study in Sherlock. This museum is a short walk from Bush Villas, west along King's Road, and into Museum Road. From 1760, this site was a military barracks. Between 1,000 to 6,000 soldiers were stationed here. The building we see today were the officers' quarters, which were added in 1893. A parade ground was added to the south of the site. During World War II, this site was used by the Royal Navy. In the 1960s, the site was decommissioned, and many of the buildings were demolished, except for the officers' quarters. This building was acquired by Portsmouth City Council in 1972 and became the Portsmouth Museum and Art Gallery. This room is dedicated to the fictional detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his creator, Arthur Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle was a hard-working, young doctor trying to build his practice. He mainly dealt with the poor in the community whilst living in Southsea. When Doyle first started to live in Southsea, he had little money for food, and in this period he lost £10 in 10 months. At night he had to read by candlelight. Conan Doyle's mother initially helped him with his rent. His 9-year-old brother, Innes, came to stay with Arthur. While in Southsea, Doyle played a number of local sports including cricket and bowls. He also helped establish Portsmouth Football Club. Doyle always embraced sports. He loved playing golf and made winter skiing popular. By 1883, his surgery business had improved sufficiently for him to be able to afford a housekeeper and furnish the house. Because of his lack of clients, Doyle had plenty of time to write, and he sold stories to magazines to help him meet his bills. The first Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, was originally going to be called A Tangled Skein. Doyle wrote 3,000 words a day and took 1 week to write a Holmes short story. He would write until lunchtime, and then again from 5 p.m. until 8 p.m. Before starting to write, Conan Doyle would sketch out the problem, the solution, and the story outline. He wrote in ink and tended not to do rewrites. Doyle originally considered calling Dr. Watson Ormond Slacker, but thankfully decided upon the name Watson. One of Doyle's inspirations for Holmes was Professor Joseph Bell, who he met while studying at Edinburgh Medical School. Sidney Paget's illustrations were a key element in the popularity of the Strand magazine's Holmes stories. The Strand magazine had intended hiring Walter Paget to illustrate the Holmes stories, but hired his brother, Sidney, by mistake. In Silver Blaze, Sidney Paget introduced Holmes' Deerstalker and Cape, which Conan Doyle hadn't actually mentioned in his text. The 12 Strand stories were collected together in 1892 as The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which became a bestseller. Doyle felt Holmes detracted from his serious work. When the Strand wanted more stories, he increased his fee in an attempt to deter them, but they still agreed and ordered more. Sherlock Holmes has appeared in numerous films, stage, television productions, games, and publications. Conan Doyle, tired of writing Holmes stories, decided to kill him off in The Final Problem in 1893, which generated a public outcry. In 1901, the Strand magazine published The Hound of the Baskervilles, the first new Sherlock Holmes story published in 8 years. Holmes wasn't in the first draft of Hound of the Baskervilles, but Doyle offered to include him, which the Strand jumped at. Whilst writing Hound of the Baskervilles, Conan Doyle got round Holmes' death in The Final Problem by setting the story in 1889, before the events at the Reichenbach Falls. The novel was a big success, and made Doyle one of the highest-paid authors of the time. In 1893, Toohey fell ill with tuberculosis. At the time, TB was considered a death sentence. With Arthur's care, Toohey would live for 13 more years. Conan Doyle had been raised a Catholic, but in later years he would go on to embrace spiritualism. In 1912, Conan Doyle published The Lost World, a forerunner to the Jurassic Park novel and films. In 1903, the second series of the Sherlock Holmes short stories started appearing in the Strand magazine. In October 1917, Conan Doyle published The Last Bow, set on the eve of World War I. The last Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of Shoshcombe Place, was published in March 1927. In September 1907, Conan Doyle married his second wife, Jean Lecky, and the couple moved to Crowborough, in Sussex. Conan Doyle died of a heart attack on the 7th of July 1930, at home in the hall of Windlesham Manor, in Crowborough. He was 71 years old. Doyle was a spiritualist, and was initially buried in the grounds at Windlesham. After his wife died, the couple were buried in the churchyard, in Minstead, in the New Forest. These carved memorial wooden tablets were originally from the church at Minstead. Conan Doyle had a second home, at Bignor Wood, near Minstead, which he had bought as a birthday present for his second wife Jean. The couple had used it as a rural retreat, while living at Crowborough in East Sussex. The village of Minstead had featured strongly in his novel, The White Company. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.